having our citizens have private firearms is the ultimate backstop against a tyrannical government.
We are? Okay, well, great, welcome. I was telling my friend John Zmirak.
Give it 5 minutes, let people populate.
Okay, so yeah, we'll wait a couple minutes before we get started. This is the first time I've ever live streamed on my own. I actually am usually my colleague and your former
classmate at Yale,
yeah.
Naomi Wolf. We were at Yale at the same time. We overlapped for 2 years, and we weren't on the same side of the ideological spectrum back then. But the world has changed so much.
She should think a little more your way.
Actually, I think she was always a sincere liberal who supported the Constitution, and she didn't realize that people around her weren't. And so, as she held to her original principles, she saw all these people dropping off. Like, she actually believed in bodily autonomy.
And still does.
And right. Whereas the other people who've been using that as a slogan to support abortion, suddenly they said, okay, you can have an abortion through the 9th month, but the hostess at TGI Fridays gets to see your vaccines passport.
Right.
She's like, wait, you didn't actually ever believe in bodily autonomy? Oh, no, we never believed in that. You didn't actually believe in freedom of speech? No, we never. Whereas Naomi actually believed in those things. And so as the left, which I call the Gadarene movement, as the swine tumbled down the cliff to drown in the sea, Naomi just stopped running and said, well, no, I'm not with that. So God bless Naomi. She is actually a woman of principle who is staying true to her principles while the rest of the left jumps into the sea to drown. Yeah,
and I appreciate her. She normally is the one who runs our when we live stream together. She's the one who sets it all up. So yeah. I'm not as technically savvy at this yet. While people are starting to tune in, John, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. This is John Zmirak. He is a friend of mine, a fellow author who I've had long respect for. And we were talking a little bit earlier. You didn't even know this.
Yeah.
I had been approached years ago to co-author a book with you. And they didn't even tell you about it.
I would have said that. I would have said yes, but I didn't know.
Oh, well.
Tragic.
We might have to make that happen now that we actually know each other.
Exactly.
It's lovely to meet you. Before we get into talking about the topic of
conversation, where I write,
Jesus and guns.
I write 4 times a week at stream.org, the Stream. And I do regular political commentaries, and I did a movie review of Megalopolis. I did a poem. I will not eat grilled Haitian cat.
Wait, you wrote a poem called that?
I will not eat grilled Haitian cat, a parody of I will not eat green eggs and ham. And we're still hoping to get Donald Trump to read some of it at a campaign rally.
That would be amazing. When we were at the RNC, my husband purchased a book, and it is the collected works of Donald Trump. And so it's just a poetry book set up with his tweets.
Yeah, his tweets are great.
In a beautiful, binding. It's just lovely.
I gotta get
And
that.
The guy was so great. It was Ian, I can't remember his last name, but he was pretending he had no idea who Donald Trump was president. I thought he was just a poet.
That's great.
Yeah, it was really good. And I didn't know you were so multi-talented.
Yeah, I do have a graphic novel I wrote in blank verse called The Grand Inquisitor. I wrote it in '94, predicting a communist taking over the Vatican. So I predicted Pope Francis in 1994.
And you know what? That is actually an excellent segue into our conversation, right? Because our topic is Jesus at the gun range. And you have a new book out now called No Second Amendment, No First. Right. And it talks about the role of Christianity in revolutions past.
Right.
And the creation of our own Bill of Rights, which is something that I have been fascinated by and actually have traveled and studied myself. Mm-hmm. But I feel like you and we've connected because we're often asking the same question.
Right.
Why has the church across the board, especially I would say the evangelical church, which I am an evangelical, you're a Catholic, become such wimps? Wow. Why are they so cowardly?
Okay. We'll start with that, and then we'll go into the historical background. I can speak for my own Catholic church that it has become basically a branch of the Democratic Party. The U.S. Catholic bishops realized that 40%, according to the Pew Research Center, 40% of native-born Catholics leave the church and never return. 40%. And rather than fix this by fixing the seminaries, recruiting fewer low IQ gay men to become priests, because a lot of the priesthood was just gay men who wanted to make their mothers happy, and they became priests. And it was a cushy job, and they could live whatever lifestyle they wanted because nobody was looking too carefully. And that's according to the bishop's own numbers, between 15 and 50% of the priests are same-sex attracted. 15 to 50%. When you consider that the general population is 2%, that's kind of staggering. So the bishops were losing their congregation. Rather than undertake the difficult reforms needed to make the church apostolic and try to win souls instead of losing them, they just decided, let's import people from Latin America to warm the pews and keep our numbers up. And they get paid by the government to do it.
Lots of money.
$3 billion in the last 15 years, the U.S. Catholic bishops have raked in through their captive charities like Catholic Charities, which is a scam.
We talk about that a lot, of course, with the situation at the border.
Yeah.
Catholic Charities roles in that.
Every time an illegal immigrant comes into America, the U.S. bishops cash a check. I would like to see if we could find a way to monetize women choosing life. And whenever a woman doesn't abort her baby, the bishops get a check. Because if that happened, they would be as aggressively pro-life as they are aggressively open borders.
Well, perhaps that's a suggestion to make to the Trump administration.
Let's try to figure out a way.
If there is a second Trump administration, and I think that segues perfectly into the background, the historical context that we're going to get into, and the Christians' roles in fighting, Christianity's role in fighting tyranny through the ages, because it has largely been the Christians who have come out and fought against communism, slavery,
jihad, totalitarianism.
And if Kamala Harris is installed, you better bet Christians are going to experience more tyranny than they have in hundreds of years.
They're coming for us. They've let us know by infiltrating our churches, infiltrating and surveilling PTA moms who don't want trans groomer books in their kids' library. So the theme of my book, I thought the reason I wrote it was, there are millions of Americans who go to the gun range on Saturday and they go to church on Sunday, but they make no connection between these two things. They maybe even feel like there's some opposition between these two things. And what they don't realize is that gun rights, as they're enshrined in our Second Amendment, are an emanation of the Christian worldview. The Christian view of the human person says that the human person has the right to defend himself and his family from violence and crime, but also that Christians have a right, when the government becomes tyrannical and every peaceful means of recourse has been exhausted, they have a right to overthrow tyrannical governments. Now that is something unique to the Christian world, and it took hundreds of years for it to really percolate. In the book, I first look at the Hebrew Bible and its discussion of violence and self-defense and when it's right to defend yourself and when it's right to fight against a wicked monarch. Then I look at St. Augustine, his just war principles, where he laid out that Christians are not pacifists. We believe in fighting on behalf of our communities against evil, but there are conditions for a war to make it just. And if you don't meet those conditions, the war is not just. Well, in the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas started to analyze, does this apply to civil war? Does this apply to overthrowing a tyrant? During the Reformation, Catholics and Protestants were persecuting each other. And so Catholic and Protestant thinkers who were being persecuted independently came up with theories. When is it just to rebel against a tyrannical monarch, especially who's oppressing you for your religion? So you had Calvinists in France and Jesuits in England independently working out theories on when it was just to overthrow a tyrannical government that was oppressing you for your religion, especially. John Locke actually got his ideas about overthrowing a tyrannical monarch from St. Robert Bellarmine, who was a Jesuit. When the English Parliament threw out King James II, because he was a Catholic, but more importantly, because he was friends with Louis XIV. He was very close to Louis XIV, and Louis XIV at that time was viciously persecuting Protestants. And the Puritans especially had been persecuted by the Anglican Church during the English Civil War. It caused the English Civil War. When the British Parliament removed James II and brought in King William and Queen Mary, the condition of them accepting the throne was that they signed something called the English Bill of Rights in 1689. And in the English Bill of Rights, there is a provision that no Protestant may be deprived of firearms. It was very specific, and I thought that was interesting. And at first, as a Catholic, that kind of rankled, like, well, why just them? But then I thought about it. It had been Protestants who were aggressively persecuted by the Anglican government, especially the Puritans, same Puritans who settled North America. Well, when our Second Amendment was written, its text was taken almost verbatim from the English Bill of Rights. So you can see a direct connection between the concern for religious freedom and gun rights, because King Charles I, King Charles II had both selectively disarmed English Puritan Protestants because they saw them as a political threat. So when our Second Amendment was written, all our founders had this background in mind. And in fact, the colonial militias that defended Massachusetts, Virginia, from the Indians, but also from the French and the Spanish, they were colonial militias. They were all organized at the local churches. People would show up on Sunday, hear a sermon about their duty to fight for their community, and then they would go do target practice and they would drill. That's where all the colonial militias came from. And it was colonial militias, remember, that started the American Revolution. It was when the British tried to seize the cannons and the powder and the muskets from the Massachusetts militia that you had the battles of Lexington and Concord. The Second Amendment recognized this. And when James Madison wrote about it in the Federalist, he said, if every other barrier to tyranny that we have set up in the Constitution, separation of powers, federalism, if they all fell away, the last stopgap, the last safeguard against tyranny would be an armed citizenry who would be a militia of 500,000 who no tyrant could subdue. And historically, every patriotic American has understood this, that having our citizens have private firearms is the ultimate backstop against a tyrannical government. And if you look around the world at countries where individuals, citizens have given up their gun rights, let's look at a few of those. In Germany, citizens don't have the right to firearms except under very strict conditions. And in Germany, homeschooling is illegal. You can lose your kids to a psychiatric institution if you homeschool. In Britain, where citizens can't have firearms, they are now imprisoning British citizens for criticizing the government's immigration policy. Not talking about violence, not racial speech, just saying, oh, I think there's too much immigration, don't you? They are putting people in prison for that, and they're actually letting rapists out of prison to make room for the.
I have friends fleeing Europe because of that, fleeing the UK because they know they're soon to follow.
In Australia, where the citizens gave up their private firearms in '96 after one mass shooting, they talked about putting the unvaccinated into concentration camps. The only reason things like this are not happening yet in America is because the government is still a little bit afraid of the people. And that's what you want. Because if the government's not afraid of the people must fear the government.
Can I just tell you an experience that I had, that a friend had recently at a mom's prayer group at a Christian school in our area? I mean, it's a very good school, but the moms get together and they pray. And after the Covenant Christian shooting in Nashville, they weren't praying for the mental health of that person or to fight against this demon of transgenderism, right? This demonic transgenderism of which the shooter was a transgender. They were praying for gun control.
Right.
John, they don't understand this. Right. I guess it's maybe we failed in educating the church about our own history.
Well, absolutely. And you see every time there's a school shooting or some mass shooting, the PR machine kicks in, and all the Catholic bishops and the woke evangelicals, they put out the same press releases. And what they talk about is the epidemic of gun violence. And there's a reason, though. There's a very dark reason why they like to use the language of public health. Because as we saw during the COVID panic, people are profoundly malleable when they're afraid of an epidemic. When something they can't even see could infect them and kill them, they're willing to give away their rights with both hands. And we saw that with people closing their churches, closing their schools, letting the government run rampant over them. The Constitution was essentially suspended in most of the country. And there are even Supreme Court precedents allowing for the for the Bill of Rights to be essentially ignored during an epidemic. And those are bad precedents that need to be overturned. So because in cases of epidemic, people are willing to give up all their freedoms, the left now uses the language of public health whenever it wants to attack one of our basic rights. They use the language of public health. That's why I call what happened here during COVID a public health dictatorship. And I think the COVID panic was a dry run for totalitarianism all through the West. And it succeeded 98%, except for a few people like Ron DeSantis, a few states like Florida, one country, Sweden. Everybody else gave in to this Orwellian power grab. Meanwhile, what was really going on was obvious. A little background. Do you know where COVID comes from? From biolabs in China that were set up by Anthony Fauci. Do you know who created the monster that is Anthony Fauci? Dick Cheney.
Yes.
Dick Cheney.
He basically made him the head of our bioweapons program.
Right, and because Congress wouldn't let them develop bioweapons in America, they did it in China. So the neocons and the left are all in bed together. During the COVID panic, they dumped virus patients in nursing homes, only in blue states. That was on purpose. That killed tens of thousands of Korean War veterans, grandmas. Meanwhile, they're closing schools, they're closing churches. They're not letting kids in the playground, kids who would not die of COVID. Right, but they're dumping COVID patients in nursing homes. Why? Intentionally, I believe, to spike the death rates, to keep the death rates high. Why? So they could have fraud-prone mail-in balloting and steal the 2020 election. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Democrat governors like Andrew Cuomo and Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom.
And in Pennsylvania, too, under Richard Levine, who's now Rachel Levine.
Right. He wasn't governor, I think.
But he was the health policy there and was very involved in the killing them.
They were willing, I call it the blue state nursing home genocide. They were willing to kill tens of thousands of Americans so they could steal the 2020 election. Think what they're willing to do now.
What do you think? Because I mean, everyone is asking, we don't know what to expect. And what I have noticed is anyone I talk to, and it doesn't matter whether even non-Christians, non-believers, everyone's on edge because there's an expectation that all of a sudden the sky is going to fall because they want it to. And even non-believers and Democrats understand that at this point.
I don't know. The only thing I can tell people is vote in person on election day and bring a blue ballpoint pen. This is the advice of David Clements, who made the amazing movie Let My People Go. He said, if you vote early, you're just telling Dominion how many fake votes to produce in advance. We want to overwhelm the system on election day so they don't have time to tinker with the algorithm to produce enough votes to steal it.
You know what scares so many people, and we're getting maybe away from the church, but there's a big early voting push happening in our churches. So it's still
big mistake.
Still relevant. Is that what happened in Maricopa County in 2022? It scared so many people on our side from voting in person. They're afraid they'll just stop the machines that day. So I understand the concerns, but still,
it's much more dangerous.
It still makes it easier for them to cheat by knowing how many numbers they need to make up for who has voted.
It is better to show up early on election day, take the day off.
Make sure you can stand there as long as you
bring a water bottle and get ready and wait as long as it takes.
And call your friends in church. It is amazing at how many, particularly evangelical Christians, don't go and vote. The number is quite staggering. I think it's about 40 million.
Yeah, George Barna had a report on that. And I think a lot of conservative Christians are tempted to sit this election out because we're disappointed by the changes to the Republican platform.
Sure.
I
was too.
Yeah.
I was really, really disappointed about the crossing out of the language related to life, especially after Donald Trump had been such a successful pro-life president. But look, we know what they're going to do. Not only are they going to continue to kill as many babies as possible with Kamala Harris, they're going to put you in jail like the beautiful woman named Beverly. I can't remember. She's Eric Metaxas' friend. Young mom headed to jail for advocating for life.
And right now they're arresting people in Britain for silently praying in the vicinity of abortion clinics. But I want to explain something to my fellow pro-lifers. Look, I've been involved in pro-life politics since I was 12 years old, when I started collecting signatures for the New York Right to Life Party door to door. Donald Trump and the Republican Party are not the reason the pro-life cause is weak. They are a symptom.
Yeah.
If the pro-life movement were stronger and more effective, after Roe v. Wade, we would have fought and defeated that Ohio referendum. We would be fighting better in the
They
states.
didn't even pay attention to the Ohio
They
referendum.
didn't spend any money on it. Now, so after Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was an obvious and predictable reaction by the abortion industry, which has billions of dollars. It's basically a mafia operation, pouring it into political campaigns. So yes, we had some political defeats. Politicians like Trump and the GOP, they respond to those signals. And they saw, oh, wow, there's blood in the water. This pro-life issue is not a winning one. So they started to back away from it. It is our job to convince the country to be pro-life so that presidents like Trump then say, okay, I got to get on board with this. Presidents don't lead public opinion, they follow it.
That also gets into the way that the church has failed in countering the culture, right? That has become dominant. And I love what Misty Fresh Tune said. She's absolutely right. We're in a society where women are voting for World War III so they can kill babies. Yes. So that's where the church has failed the culture.
Right. And you've got Catholic bishops saying that immigration is every bit as important as abortion. Hell, Pope Francis said, deporting anyone from any country for any reason is as bad as aborting a baby. Now that is heresy, and it's also idiotic. It's one of the stupidest things. No intelligent person can entertain that in his mind for more than 5 seconds. If you actually say deportation is like abortion, you're saying that sending someone back to his home in Mexico is like killing a baby, butchering it, and leaving it in a medical waste dump. So you're saying Mexico is a medical waste dumpster. Is that a nice thing to say about Mexico? That seems almost racist, doesn't it? To say that not being allowed to come into America, get on public assistance, and vote Democrat is equivalent to being cut up in the womb and burned as medical waste. Nobody really believes that. It's just a talking point. It's just cheap propaganda. And the people like Pope Francis who say it know that they're lying.
If we're going to save this country, if we're going to preserve our constitutional republic, then I would even question it's hanging by a thread. Yep. It's barely existing at this point. Right. It will take the Christians once again. Right. It will take the Christians standing up. We have a few people who are not non-believers who are with us, but not many, right? It is really on the backs of the Christians.
It's surprising how people aren't particularly religious Christians, like Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Naomi Wolf. They actually care about freedom. And they actually care.
Naomi's Jewish.
Right. They care about freedom, and they see that freedom comes the only place political freedom has ever emerged has been in societies with a Christian biblical view of the human person.
So what do we do? And I know that you talk a lot about this in your book, and I want to make sure that people understand that we're talking about your book. It's on the screen behind us. No Second Amendment, no First. A very important read. Actually, Christian ladies like to get together and do these book clubs, right? But the books are sometimes, and I think that's great, but sometimes they're not really needle moving books. This is a book you should get together and get your Christian friends together and do your ladies book club with this book and get prepared to fight. I can explain what can we do. I mean, what do Christians need to be prepared to do?
Well, okay.
Because right now they're being told by their pastors. I went to a church here when I just moved. I moved into the country a couple of years ago, a couple of years ago, and I was testing out churches, and I go to one down the road, and look, I'm in rural Virginia, and the guy is telling his congregation, I had just gotten canceled. I had just gotten fired from Newsmax for telling the truth and using my First Amendment free speech. And I had a guy, a pastor, stand up there in the pulpit, and he was telling his congregation not to be involved in politics and quoting Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, well, Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, who helped Iran turn into a dictatorship and
killed Christians,
and the Iran-Iraq war, which killed millions of people. So good old Jimmy Carter, sweet, lovable Baptist Sunday school teacher, has more blood on his hands than almost any American president. But I want to just give a very clear recent historical example. Okay, first of all, you know that whenever a dictatorship takes over, the first thing they do is grab all the guns. Yeah. Lenin did that. Hitler did that, Castro, Mao Zedong. The first thing they do is collect the guns. if you want almost a laboratory experiment in the importance of gun rights to religious freedom, you just have to look at the tragedy of the Christians of Syria and Iraq.
They've been wiped out.
Well, actually, in Iraq, when the U.S. took over, we imposed American-style gun control. The Christians obeyed the law, the Islamists did not.
Right.
In
You could
Syria,
have seen that coming.
in Syria, the Christians said, hell with that. They formed militias, they allied with the Kurds, and they conquered ISIS. These are the same kinds of Christians. They speak the same language. They're from the age of the apostles. One of them were wiped out and sent into refugee
They're
camps.
the oldest Christians in the
Right.
world.
The Iraqis were wiped out or sent into refugee camps. In Syria, they are building new churches and they're making thousands of converts. Why? Because they kept their guns. So what I tell everyone,
Those are two really great recent
Yeah.
real world examples.
I tell people the time to use your gun is on whoever comes to take it, because that's your last chance. So if they actually try to seize private firearms in America, then we're at our 1776 moment. It's our last chance. Because after that, you are a veal calf at a scallopini factory. You are at the mercy of the government, the way the British are. Britons are going to prison for praying. They're going to prison for writing on Facebook that there should maybe be less Muslim immigration. They're going to prison. In Britain, land of Magna Carta, mother of our parliaments, where our liberties come from, it's gone. It's gone in Australia. It's gone in New Zealand. It's gone in Canada. In Canada, there are pastors in prison for reading aloud from the book of Leviticus. And they have a new hate crimes law that they're proposing, which will probably pass, where on the suspicion of hate crime, before you or even go to trial, you can be placed under house arrest on a mere accusation. That is the level of dictatorship that the left has in mind for the US. And that's why our vote coming up in November is so important. But I also tell people, you know what? Stockpile ammo. I think AR-15 rounds are the currency of the future.
I agree with you. And my husband certainly does too. So he's been preparing that way for some time. Look, John, I think you gave some excellent, clear, articulate points about what we're facing and how to deal with it. And again, this is in your book as well. So I'll again recommend everyone go get it. No Second Amendment, no First. It's available on Amazon. Is that where you're sending most people to buy?
And to Calamo Press. Yeah.
And to Calamo Press, yeah. CALAMO. Our good friend Gray Delaney over there. Thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you.
This is something new we're doing. One thing we're doing is creating community, and we're all getting together more. And I recommend you and my audience find those people in your community, get together. It's almost like the old school salon, right? Yeah. Where you talk about ideas, issues, debate. Come up with ways to fix issues right in your own area. And so I love that I'm getting to sit with you. I'm going to be blessed to sit with a lot of people this weekend.
Check me out at stream.org, where I write 4 times a week.
Excellent. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you.
And thank you all. This was fun. We'll join you again soon.